Porn.
That pussy got me screaming, crying, pissing, shitting, shooting ropes.
I learned something interesting recently when a bunch of folk were looking into rape play and came across my video. Thanks, Wendigoon. The developers ceased their operations. Yep, after 30 fruitful years in the industry, the respectful degenerates at Illusionsoft, or Illusion, or whatever the fuck you want to call them, closed their doors. And not metaphorically this time. They didn't provide any reasons in their statement, but if you look at the remaining games on Steam, it's pretty clear they were still catering to specific markets, and either that market wasn't enough to sustain them, or they couldn't stop their games from being pirated.
Finally, piracy did something good for once, am I right, fellas?
Remarked those who only knew these guys for rapeplay and nothing else. And, well, I can't really blame them, and some are pointing to this joint called Eel Games as their successor, since they popped up right at the same time Illusion went kaput with a game that's suspiciously titled like one of Illusion's games, and having a rather similar art style, all of which they've denied any involvement with. Whatever the case may be, I don't think it's fair to dismiss them outright. I'll repeat, they lasted 30 years. A lot of game developers don't last even 3 generations, and Illusion had been kicking around for 3 straight decades. And it's not like they came out of the woodworks, crapped out rapeplay, and then sped off into the night. They made a lot of games, and their first one wasn't even an eroge. It was a strategy war game that looks like a complete ripoff of Famicom Wars, just with cute anime girls representing the leaders instead of no one. But that's still 20 years before Intelligent Systems started doing that. To be fair, it is true they were originally formed as an adult game-focused spin-off for some other game companies I could find very little information about, but based on what these fellows would make in the future, I like to think they realized ripping off other games was the best that they could do, so they focused more on the titillation aspects.
Oh, but it's just porn. It's icky, gross, disgusting. It'll never have any cultural relevance anywhere. So why are you treating this so seriously, you weirdo?
Well, Gerald Strawman, you can be as dismissive as you want to be, but the fact is, the types of games Illusion and several other companies were making were a very important part of Japan's gaming history, and we need look no further to establish that importance than our topic for today. A rather obscure entry in this niche that played a key role in the development of the first content rating system dedicated to video games.
Oh, I bet you're curious now, aren't you? Well, strap on, you sexy beasts. It's time to perform an informational and educational analysis on Saori, Bishoujo Tachi no Yakata. And we'll start with that word right there, Bishoujo. This term has become a bit of an all-encompassing name, and naturally grew out of the anime and manga scene, but our focus will be on the Bishoujo game genre, one of the most rapidly growing and popular types of games in Japan during the 80s and 90s. Generally speaking, a lot of these games were dating sim visual novel type games that generally involve interacting with beautiful girls, which is what Bishoujo roughly translates to. The big Google machine also displays it as Slight Virgin, which probably says a lot more about whoever's feeding this software, but, well, it's not completely wrong either. Amongst the casual or romantic interactions, several other Bishoujo games offered the more personal, erotic kind of interacting. Yes, not all of the games that fell into this genre were pornographic in nature, but thanks to Koei busting those doors open during the early 80s, that's what Bishoujo games were rooted in. Other startups with bright futures ahead of them would also dabble in erotic games. Nihon Falcom had an erotic sliding tile puzzle game called Joshi Desse Private, Square had an erotic adventure game called Alpha, and Enix had an adventure minigame showcase called Lolita Syndrome. Well, you have to start somewhere. As I said though, these fellows would go on to make games that were bigger and better and far less uncomfortable to talk about.
And many other companies born from this craze ended up specializing in it, bringing wholesome eroge content to the humble abodes of computer owners, thanks to the advent of Microsoft DOS, making the development process for these games much simpler than before. In fact, the majority of these groups started out as singular entities or small teams self-producing this stuff from their own humble abodes, which takes us to one of the first companies formed within this big throbbing vein, Jest. These fellas saw success in this big throbbing vein with 1985's Tenshitachi no Go-Go. But I guess some of the workers were either dissatisfied with the direction, or didn't get enough coin, or weren't hoardy enough, so several more companies broke off from them over the next few years. One of these companies was Fairy Tail, who would find success of their own with erotic titles such as Lipstick Adventure and Can Can Bunny, as well as a heap of trouble in trying to maintain that success. With this market continuing to expand beyond anyone's imagination, these erotic games started seeing more and more scrutiny from the general public, especially ones that had more risque or taboo content beyond straight up fucking. For example, regular viewers, or Wendigoon followers, whichever you are, should recall 177, the side-scrolling auto-runner where you chase after a young lady to do the fun eroge stuff with them, albeit against their will. Despite that title getting singled out and eventually banned, there were still a fair bit more of these types lurking around the market and pushing those boundaries of those moral limitations. Or more accurately, pushing the buttons of that moral public. Which is where Saori enters the picture. Saori was developed and published by Fairy Tail in 1991 under the alias X-Shite, and has you playing as the titular character to do what would eventually become the standard Bishoujo thing of moving around and making some choices when prompted to do so that stuff can happen. That stuff being sex. But not just any sex. No. We're talking about all the sex, all the fetishes, all of the debauchery that a room full of sweaty programmers could crank out onto a PC98/Sharp X68000. I was going to list out what goes on in Saori while lovingly recreating them via these amiibos for y'all's enjoyment, but I can't put them through this crap. Like, how am I supposed to recreate the introduction that has Saori taking a wee while the word sex is literally staring at her in the face? There, that's all you pervs are gonna get. All that really needs to be said is that Saori sees nothing but sex, and dreams of nothing but sex. And those dreams involve being kidnapped by people wearing these weirdo masks and being brought to a big old mansion where each and every goddamn room is filled with nothing but goddamn sex. Fittingly, the game's subtitle translates to The House of Beautiful Girls. It's not really that bad compared to some of the other games we've seen here, but it's just a lot. Taking this all in, how exactly could Fairy Tail get in trouble over something as innocent as this? Well, leave it to a horny middle schooler who yoinked a copy of it from a shop in Kyoto to fuck everything up. After the cops apprehended the junior thief and their goods, they presumably had a look at the software themselves, because I don't know how the hell they would have found this out, and discovered all of the above was not fully subjected to the country's censorship policy regarding obscene material. In case you weren't aware, in accordance with Section 175 of the Japanese Penal Code as stated well over a century ago, most forms of pornography usually have all instances of genitals from any participants, willing or otherwise, covered up. The boobs, the mouth, the armpits, the ears, the nostrils, the booty, even the booty hole, those are all fine as long as Mr. or Mrs. Happy aren't anywhere near or in them. Anyone trying to sell the porn without the censorship intact could get sent up to the clink for 2 years and served a fine of up to 2.5 million yen. That's $25,000. Given that the Bishoujo market had grown so large and so quickly by that point, it's not surprising that games like Saori flew under the radar, usually by programming in a secret code to allow players to toggle off those options. Yeah, just like the Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat and its blood code, but with dicks and pussies instead. So yeah, it's exactly the same.
Doing this was still quite risky though, which is why Fairy Tail gave themselves a different name when releasing Saori, thus providing them more than enough plausible deniability should uncensored shit hit the fan. As clever as an idea that seemed to be for them, it didn't work. And the police ended up getting a search warrant for their HQ in order to try and find more of this obscene material. They also got a search warrant for Jast and a bunch of local resellers making a quick buck off these games, all of this culminating in the president for both Jast and Fairy Tail getting arrested for selling this obscene material. Man, the Kyoto Popo don't fuck around. Now, this may have been influenced more by those public attitudes towards this market, and doujin/otaku culture in general hitting an extreme low point around this time, thanks to the highly sensationalized and tragic serial killings enacted by Tsutomu Miyazaki. But the Saori incident was the breaking point. There had to be some regulation with the Bishoujo. As a result, several games that could get their respective developers thrown into the Saori house were recalled and re-released with law-abiding mosaics, and every subsequent game would receive the same treatment. Looking into who else got caught up in these shenanigans, the most interesting bit I found involved fucking Gainax of all people. Yep, Evangelion Gurren Lagann Gainax. They also made eroge titles as a side thing during the 90s, and one of those titles saw just a bit too much pubic hair shown off in the nudie bits, so they got hit with a lawsuit that lasted for the rest of that decade. Above all, various members from the Japanese adult games industry gathered together to form a new organization that would manage these games' releases and even assign them an appropriate rating in accordance with their content, thereby establishing the Ethics Organization for Computer Software, aka Sofurin. So there you go. The first officially recognized video games rating organization, predating the ESRB by another 2 years, and Japan's own Sero by a full decade, all because of porn. Let's give a big round of applause for porn. Thank you, porn. Thank you so much, porn. I love you, porn! Now, while this may seem impressive, I don't think the folks who formed the ESRB looked to Sofurin following the 1993 Senate hearing and went, "Ah yes, these classy foreigners are onto something, let's do what they're doing," or anything like that. In fact, Sofurin is a weird organization. From what I gauged, much like with the Bishoujo genre, the group originally focused on rating eroge titles before introducing new ratings down the line when they started rating mobile titles too, alongside rewarding scholarships for aspiring game developers that were probably not old enough to play the games they're rating, and fighting against game piracy. Now clearly they're doing a great job there. But I had thought that these ratings would also carry over to non-hentai PC games, and I could not for the life of me find their ratings on anything besides hentai. Naturally, you would then think Sero would possibly be the ones to assign ratings for the bigger PC titles instead, but no, I can't find their ratings on the PC titles I looked into either. They just only do it for console games. But most bizarre of all is that there was another rating entity formed for eroge titles. This is back in 2010, and these guys are known as the Japan Content Review Center. They have much larger roots in the country's adult video industry, but I guess with the formation of this new group, they just started doing the same regulation stuff for adult games too. And these aren't government regulated either, like they're all independent organizations, much like the ESRB, so I don't know, maybe them and Sofurin work together? Because Sofurin is still around to this day, if their horribly outdated website and Twitter account have anything to say. Yeah, it's a mess. Like, for being the first games rating organization, you'd think there'd be a bit more concrete info about their activities, right? Perhaps if I read Japanese, I might be able to understand what the fuck these guys are talking about. But seriously, if anyone can find out where these additional ratings are being used, please tell me. Like, I have to assume it's probably the mobile games, right? Like, did they use this for Genshin Impact? What's that rated? What's Pokemon Sleep rated? What's fucking Flappy Bird rated? Oh, wait. Regardless, in spite of all the bad buzz surrounding their establishment, the otaku spirit lived on strong, and the Bishoujo genre would continue to grow and evolve, with companies like Leaf, Key, Elf, and Type Moon providing more interesting stories to go along with all the sex.
And eventually the genre would expand to the console market to reach an even larger audience, by way of cutting out the sex. But obviously the hentai games didn't go anywhere at all. In fact, Jest would actually form a US branch in the mid-90s to bring full translations of their most popular titles to the growing Western otaku market. Even nuttier is that they somehow outlasted the original Jest and Fairy Tail, and are also still around to this day as one of the only online game stores that's dedicated to selling eroge in the West. Is it eroge? Have I been saying it wrong the whole fucking time? I don't give a shit. There's a lot more we could bury our faces into with this topic, and that's still not metaphorically speaking. There is a lot. But I think we've gotten our fair share of Bishoujo history today. Rapeplay and the other more infamous titles will likely still get the most attention, but I don't think the Saori incident should go unnoticed. It's a pretty interesting tale, with some pretty interesting significance in the realm of video games. And just because it involves porn doesn't diminish its importance. I think you all need to start respecting that porn a bit more now, shouldn't you? Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to remove all of my search history for the past few weeks. There we go. Thank Christ, no one found out about that. Wait, why is Bandicam recording? Wait, who put this clip in the final edit? Davron, I swear to God, if you had something to do with this, I'm gonna fucking kill you.